Hi, I'm Dan Acre. I'm Director of Operations for the Ontario Regiment Museum. I've been asked to talk about a vehicle that I find particularly interesting. And it's this particular Jeep right here. What happened was during the Second World War, at the end of the Second World War, back up. This Jeep was actually used by the regiment in the Second World War. Okay, it was a tank regiment, and so basically, if they were going to be supporting infantry, the officer would, of the tanks that are supporting the infantry would have to go meet with the infantry to find out their plan to coordinate their actions. Now he's not going to drive his tank there, so he had a Jeep, which was known as the Officer Commanding Rover. This is Rover. So he had a driver. He would jump in the Jeep, drive over to talk with the infantry, figure out what the attack is, where they want the tanks to be, etc. Then he would drive back, inform his soldiers, and the next day they would be off supporting the infantry. So, at the end of the war, basically all the Canadian vehicles were left in Holland and given to the Dutch and the Belgians. Because Canada didn't need to bring all these trucks back to Canada, their army was being downsized, of course, the war was over. So, what happened was, very few Canadian military vehicles were repatriated back to Canada. They were just given to the Dutch and the Belgian governments. So this is interesting because this is the Jeep that served with the officer commanding a B squadron in Italy and throughout the war. What happened was, while in Italy, while he was driving, he was wounded in the arm. He was evacuated to the hospital. He lost his arm. And the last thing he told his driver was, "Don't let anyone steal my Jeep," because Jeep stealing was endemic. Truck stealing was endemic. Military vehicles don't need keys for the most part. You just have to know the sequence of how to get it going. So, the officer's last words obviously rang true because after the war, the officer was at his farm in Whitby when all of a sudden he gets a phone call from his driver. And his driver says, "Sir, your Jeep's in Trenton." So the officer didn't ask too many questions. It's not a good thing to do. So what he did is he went to downtown Oshawa, found a army surplus parking area of vehicles are getting rid of. And so he bought a horrible Jeep and removed the VIN plate from it. And then he and some friends went to Trenton, where they found the Jeep, which had been pushed off to the side, put the VIN plate on, and drove it off the base. And they brought it to the farm. And his wife painted it pink and put pom-poms on the side. Everyone knew it was Evie's Jeep. Fast forward, the Jeep obviously had aged, and so we rebuilt the Jeep for the family. Unfortunately, by the time it was ready to be returned, the officer had passed, and the family, in turn, donated it to the museum. So while it's not a tank, okay, while it doesn't have a cannon, it certainly has a very important place in our hearts as being the Jeep that was brought home. What's interesting is, like I think I mentioned, but he had managed to convince his sergeant had managed to convince some American pilots who were flying back to come to on their way, stop off in Trenton. So probably they saw a little red engine check light on their dashboard or on the cockpit. They landed, unloaded it, and carried on their way as the red lights seemed to vanish. The origins are a little obscure, but we know this is the Jeep that served with the regiment in World War II. Thank you.